Hello, happy Monday. This video is for if you missed today's lesson or if you need a recap of today's lesson. So I'm going to walk through what we talked about in today's class, and this is for Monday, November 2nd. So today we talked about cellular respiration. So over this weekend, you should have drawn me a picture of what does cellular respiration look like. And we actually looked at some examples of those in class today. So if you were absent and want to see some of your peers, let me know and I can send you some pictures. But we talked about cellular respiration, right? And I hope you know by now that what is cellular respiration? This is the process that your cells use to produce energy. So this is used to produce energy. And since we're talking about cellular energy, this is going to be energy in the form of ATP. Right, and this process happens in the mitochondria. The wind is going crazy outside, so I'm sorry if you can hear that. Okay, so you need to know the formula for cellular respiration. So two things have to go into the mitochondria in order to produce this energy. And those two things are glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen, which is O2. So those two things go into the mitochondria, and they're used to produce ATP, but they also produce two waste products that our body has to get rid of. And those two waste products are going to be CO2 and water. So whenever we draw a reaction like this, you need to be able to identify your reactants and your products. So reactants are going to be what goes into this reaction. What reacts in order to form something? So what goes into the reaction? And your products are going to be what is produced. What comes out of the reaction? Okay. Now, someone in one of my classes asked, whenever we draw a chemical formula like this, why don't we use an equal sign, right? Because those reactants and products should be the same. But we're never going to use an equal sign because we use this arrow to represent a chemical reaction. So this arrow actually means what we call yields. And when we say yields, we're basically talking about produces. So we're able to say that these reactants yield or produce the products. Because this is a chemical reaction, it shouldn't be the same on both sides. We're going to have different compounds on the left and different compounds on the right. So whenever you draw a chemical reaction, you should always use an arrow. Now let's draw a picture of what cellular respiration looks like. So I told you guys that this happens in the mitochondria. So your mitochondria should look something like this. Now, whenever we draw a chemical reaction happening inside an organelle, I'm always going to do it or to draw it using arrows pointing in and arrows coming out. And this is so we can figure out what goes into this reaction and what comes out. So our two reactants of this equation are going to be glucose and oxygen. But where does this glucose and where does this oxygen come from? So we've been talking about the digestive system, right? And that is to prepare you for this process because this glucose that we get comes from the food that we eat, which has been broken down in the digestive system. Okay, but where does this oxygen come from? Does our body just like poof oxygen? No, right? We have to inhale that oxygen. So the oxygen that's needed for cellular respiration comes from every single time you take a breath and you breathe in oxygen. So this oxygen comes from what you breathe in or inhale, which is going to come from our respiratory system. Right, and so those two things, glucose and oxygen, go into the mitochondria, and they're used to produce 3 products. That first product is going to be ATP, which is that cellular energy that we've talked about. Right. The second product is CO2, and the third product is water. But where do these 2 waste products go? So CO2 is carbon dioxide, H2O is water. Where do these things go? Well, hopefully you got that we're actually going to get rid of these 2 things by exhaling. So we exhale or breathe them out. So every time you breathe in oxygen, you're also going to breathe out CO2. It's a waste product that our body has to get rid of. So we're going to get rid of that CO2 by exhaling. And water. Now, this isn't a significant amount of water that we're talking about. It's not like our body is producing gallons of water every time it undergoes cellular respiration. In fact, it's kind of just a really, really tiny amount. And that is going to be released through water vapor. So you might notice that anytime you breathe into a window, it might fog up. And that fog is actually caused by the water vapor that you exhale. So water vapor is exhaled as well. And this is the same reason why COVID is currently spreading through respiratory droplets, right? That's because a tiny bit of water is produced every time we exhale. So that is all that you need to know about cellular respiration. Now tonight, you're going to be learning about photosynthesis. So I'm going to give you a little preview of what you're going to be doing tonight, because I'm willing to bet you already know some stuff about photosynthesis. So what is photosynthesis? First of all, I hope you know that we don't do it. It only happens in plants. Well, hold on, this doesn't want to draw. Right, so plants use photosynthesis to produce something. And that something is going to be food. But what do they use to produce food? Well, we always find plants outside, right? Unless you've potted them inside your house. But we find them outside because they need sunlight. So photosynthesis is where plants use sunlight to produce food. But what type of food are we talking about here? Like, do we find plants grilling a barbecue outside? Are they like cooking up some nachos out there? What are they up to? No, all plants are able to produce is glucose. So that food that we're talking about is glucose. So this is going to happen not in the mitochondria, but in the chloroplast, which is an organelle that's only found in plants. So this is why we call plants autotrophs. So when we break this word down, auto means it happens on its own or automatically, and troph is talking about food or the production of food. So if we break this word down, it means that plants are able to automatically make their own food. So what does this equation look like? So we know that plants are going to use the sun, but we're actually going to find 2 more reactants here. Okay, so in addition to needing sunlight, plants also need water. And the last thing that plants need is CO2. So these are our reactants of photosynthesis. And those 3 reactants are going to go into the chloroplast to produce 2 things. The first thing being that food, right? They need to be able to produce glucose, so C6H12O6. And they also do something special, and that is that they produce oxygen. So these 2, I don't want to say things, but these 2 compounds are the products of this reaction. So this is what is produced. Now, I'm going to draw a picture of what this looks like. It might be kind of small on this page, but we're going to roll with it. So this is my chloroplast. And I need to draw 3 arrows going in for my reactants. And then I need to draw 2 arrows coming out for my products. So the 3 reactants that go into the chloroplast are going to be sunlight, water, and CO2. So where does this water come from? Well, plants have to absorb that rain that falls from the sky and hits the ground through their roots. So plants absorb water through roots. And where does the CO2 come from? Well, this comes from us, right? We exhale CO2 every time we breathe, and plants are able to absorb that CO2 and use it to, oh no, I think I've messed up. Let's see if this works. Hold on. No, it's a highlighter. What did I do? Oh no, please hold everybody. I want it to be the same consistency. There we go, that's the same size. So we exhale CO2 every time we breathe. Plants are able to absorb that and use it to undergo photosynthesis. This comes from us. Organisms exhale. All right. Now, those 3 reactants go into the chloroplast and 2 things come out. And those 2 products are going to be glucose, C6H12O6, and oxygen. C6H12O6 is, of course, glucose that we are then able to eat, and oxygen, which is super important because organisms need it to breathe. Now, you might have noticed that I color-coded some of this information, okay? And I did that for a reason. So if I zoom out here, so you guys can see both of these reactions at the same time, you might notice that the products of cellular respiration are written in the same color as the reactants for photosynthesis. And the products of photosynthesis are written in the same color as the reactants for cellular respiration. And that's because these processes actually feed into each other. And because of that, they are kind of opposites. So if let's see if I can outline these. Where's my, oh, there it is. One of these days I will get a hang of this iPad, guys. That day is not today, but it will come. So the products here are the same as the reactants here. And the products here are the same as the reactants here. So these processes need each other to continue because cellular respiration uses glucose and oxygen that come from photosynthesis. And photosynthesis uses products that come from cellular respiration. So these processes feed directly into each other and create this never-ending loop. But really the moral of the story is that without plants, none of us would be here because we need photosynthesis to produce oxygen and we need photosynthesis to produce glucose that allows us to live. So next time you see a plant, thank them for their service because they are the reason that you are able to survive. All right, now that's all I've got for you guys today. Once again, I hope you have a wonderful day and I will see you tomorrow.